Hey investor friends, I'm michellemarki, and it's one of the most wonderful times of the year. And no, I'm not talking about the holidays, although they are pretty awesome too. What I'm referring to are the latest 13F filings of my favorite super investors, Warren Buffett, Charlie Munger, Monish Pabrai, and Guy Spear, coming out usually up to 45 days after the end of the quarter. And people like Charlie Munger of Daily Journal Corporation usually don't care to wait that long to release what Daily Journal owns. So his 13F usually comes out pretty early after the end of a quarter. But the rest of them, like Warren Buffett, don't want to reveal what they're invested in so soon. So they keep it a mystery right up until the deadline pretty much. So as of November 14, a lot of super investors 13F filings came out, and I'm mainly going to focus on Warren Buffett's Berkshire Hathaway's latest activity because I find some of their moves especially noteworthy, and I'll just share my casual opinions about what I find interesting. And if you also enjoy studying Berkshire Hathaway and Warren Buffett, I hope you'll like and subscribe, and let's talk about what's changed. And so for the period ending September 30, 2022, or the third quarter 2022, Warren Buffett's Berkshire Hathaway seemed to keep spending to the tune of $9 billion worth of stock purchases. And to many of us, that sounds like a lot of money. But for Berkshire Hathaway, that might just be a really small sum compared to the cash hoard that they're still holding. Because even though they spent that much money in the third quarter, Berkshire Hathaway is still sitting on about $109 billion of cash. And that's up actually from $105 billion that they were on in the second quarter and $106 billion in the first quarter this year. So really, Berkshire Hathaway has still been really holding on to a lot of cash and not really aggressively spending as much as you would think, because after they did blockbuster stock buybacks in 2020 and 2021, where they bought back $25 billion and $27 billion of Berkshire Hathaway stock respectively back in those years, this year has been somewhat of a trickle of stock buybacks, where in the first quarter they had $3.2 billion worth of buybacks. Then it went down to only $1 billion in the second quarter. And now in the third quarter, it was about $1.1 billion for a total so far this year of about $5.3 billion worth of stock buybacks. So compared to the previous 2 years of really low interest rates, now all of a sudden, I would imagine with interest rates going up, the math on stock buybacks may have changed for Warren Buffett. And so maybe there's more opportunities to deploy capital aside from just buying back stock or putting it into some equities right now that could be seeing more downside ahead. So even though Buffett seemed to keep up some buying, and maybe we shouldn't refer to Buffett buying necessarily, because it could have been his investment managers, Todd and Ted, who are usually the ones buying a lot of stocks. But we don't want to make a fool of ourselves and prematurely ascribe certain purchases to Buffett, because sometimes he makes purchases, like he definitely said he bought Activision Blizzard before, but it might be too early to tell whether Warren Buffett bought one of the latest really big purchases known as Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company with ticker symbol TSM. So maybe we shouldn't jump to conclusions right away about who at Berkshire may have bought that stock, but I find that a very interesting pick. And there were also two more that seem to be brand new stock buys in Berkshire's portfolio, where they sold completely Store. That stock I don't really know that much about aside from it being a real estate investment trust, but they sold out of that completely and replaced it with a few picks of Louisiana Pacific Corp and Jefferies Financial Group. So between those picks, it seems like Berkshire went from 47 equity holdings in the second quarter to 49 equity holdings in the third quarter. And even though I don't know who at Berkshire Hathaway made the call to invest over $4 billion across 60 million shares in Taiwan Semi, it's a super meaningful position, coming in at 10 out of 49 positions. So we know that Warren Buffett likes to have highly concentrated, important picks. So my hunch is that maybe it could have been Buffett, but it doesn't really matter. At the end of the day, it's among the top 10. So it's an important pick to maybe consider if this kind of company could be within our circle of competence. investments and see if we can understand what might be the investment case, especially if we want to ride Buffett's or Berkshire's coattails and either potentially invest in Taiwan Semi or just maybe invest in Berkshire Hathaway if we're not sure. But by investing in Berkshire, we could potentially be part of any gains that they might have in the future, and also losses, you never know. But I think it's fascinating that this seems to be sort of an opposite decision of Charlie Munger, where Daily Journal has remained invested in Alibaba as of the third quarter, which of course is in China. And it's different with Taiwan Semi, where we know that there's some tension between Taiwan and China and the US somehow getting involved in the mix. And we don't know what's going to happen in the future, but I find it really interesting that right now for these best of friends, DJ Co is invested in Alibaba, whereas Berkshire is invested in TSM. So it will be interesting to see where this might go, but I'm gonna definitely check out more about this company. And also, I estimate that Berkshire Hathaway may have started buying into TSM anywhere between the range of $70 to $90 per share, because that's where it mostly trended throughout the third quarter, and it could even be more on sale. So I wouldn't be surprised if Berkshire may have bought even more when TSM went as low as about $60 per share. And who knows if it's still on sale right now at about $80 per share, but that's right around the average of what it was in the third quarter. So I wouldn't be surprised if Berkshire might even buy some more in the future quarters. And then in some moves in oil and gas that I think were largely expected, Berkshire continued buying into Occidental Petroleum to the tune of $2.6 billion worth, and Chevron at about $384 million worth based on my estimates, making their total investments in Chevron almost $24 billion and in Occidental Petroleum almost $12 billion. So these are pretty hefty. And it's interesting because after Berkshire had bought some Oxy back in 2019, they sold out of it in 2020, only to start buying back in as of the first quarter 2022. And then with Chevron, they've been mostly buying this since the third quarter of 2020, and they sold some of it in the first and second quarters of 2021, but they've been mostly buying since 2020 throughout 2021 and 2022, so much so that they now have about 165 million shares, and with Oxy over 194 million shares. So across those positions, I would think that winter is literally coming, where oil and gas are probably going to be heating up a lot of homes, and it's probably going to get expensive. And I think that Berkshire is going to keep riding their belief in the oil and gas fields of how necessary they are. And I think that this is probably going to be good in terms of Berkshire collecting dividends, and also whatever else Berkshire might see as valuable in oil and gas. It's not really my area, but it kind of makes sense just on a sort of outsider looking in point of view. And a couple of more interesting tidbits on Chevron and Oxy is that they both leapfrogged a couple of other positions high up on the Berkshire portfolio list, where Oxy leapfrogged Kraft Heinz from 7th into 6th position, and Chevron leapfrogged one of Buffett's favorites that he loves drinking every day, Coca-Cola, from 4th place into 3rd place. So now after Apple and Bank of America, Chevron is number 3. So it's kind of funny because it's Berkshire's ABC. And also another fun fact is that Oxy was founded by actor Armie Hammer's great-grandfather by the same name, Armand Hammer. So that was just interesting that I just learned about when Googling about Oxy a little bit more. And also among some of Berkshire's portfolio moves, it's interesting how they kept adding to their Celanese and Paramount Global positions as a continuation from the second quarter, but they made absolutely no moves on Apple, Ally, and Markel, which I think is really interesting because they had opportunities to buy some of these stocks within range or even below what they might have paid in the second quarter. And so I find it interesting that they didn't seem to have a continuous appetite, especially on Apple and Markel. And then they kept reducing in General Motors and Kroger and US Bancorp. And another stock that they reduced in this quarter was Bank of New York Mellon. And after buying Activision Blizzard, or ATVI, for 3 quarters in a row from Q4 2021 through Q2 2022, it's somewhat surprising to see Berkshire reduced their position in ATVI. So maybe they had their fill of that arbitrage opportunity. And maybe it's interesting how with interest rates going up, you would think that this is good for bank stocks and financial services companies. So maybe you might feel like being bullish in some of those companies as interest rates go up. And you would think that these financial related companies should be making more money. And it's interesting how Berkshire stock itself is on the rise. But for some reason, that doesn't seem to be as appealing based on how Berkshire made no moves to buy more of Ally Financial and reduce their holdings in US Bancorp and Bank of New York Mellon. So I guess maybe things are cooling down a little bit in the banking atmosphere. And also with Kroger, it's probably not a good sign for the stock if their merger for Albertsons were to go through. And maybe consumer staples are not doing as well now that things are kind of going back to normal and people don't find themselves hoarding as much. And also maybe just in general, people are trying to hunker down and maybe not spend as much as they were before, as the price pressures from suppliers are starting to go down, and maybe some food products are starting to go on sale some more and be more affordable than they had been throughout 2020 and 2021. And finally, for what it's worth, I figured I would just mention some of the activity or lack thereof of 2 other of my favorite super investors, Monish Pabrai and Guy Spear, where Monish Pabrai bought about $7.4 million worth of BAM, or Brookfield Asset Management. And that seems to be the only thing that he bought or did in this 3rd quarter on US stocks. And for Guy Spear, he didn't do anything in the 3rd quarter, and back in the 2nd quarter, he had sold entirely out of Twitter. So based on US activity, it doesn't seem like Guy and Monish are up to all that much. So we'll just have to stay tuned, as maybe they, as well as Buffett and Munger, could be biding their time for even better US stock buying opportunities the more that they generally trend downwards, as interest rates are still going up. And even though the pace of interest rates could be slowing down, they're still somewhat going up. So I expect somewhat more downside. And if people like Jamie Dimon are correct, there could even be 20 to 30% more downside in US stocks. So who knows who will be right, but it would be great to be able to be on the lookout for some stock buying opportunities if you've done your homework and thoroughly researched your favorite companies, or even just invested in the US if you believe that eventually the US stock market will recover, and then maybe a low-cost index fund could be for you, like in the S&P 500. So if you found this video helpful, please like and subscribe, and I wish you well on your journey to being the best investor you can be. Till next time.